How much time do you spend thinking about thought? Not trying to understand a specific thought, but rather spending time trying to understand what thoughts are. As foo-foo or hippy-dippy as that may sound, it's one thing that can make a huge impact on your life. Today's guest, Kevin Knebl, explains why understanding thought is so much more important than trying to disentangle individual thoughts. Kevin is an international speaker, author, and a coach who works with companies from small to Fortune 500. Kevin tells us the story of what brought him to sales in the first place and how becoming a student of the sales game created his path to success. Otis, Kevin, and I discuss the importance of principles and how you can know if you're on the right path. We also talk about the choice that we all have when it comes to our thoughts and our feelings. How does compassion for a criminal or a murderer teach you about yourself? Why are the most important truths so simple? And is it really turtles all the way down? Kevin, Otis, and I dive into all this and much more on this fun and fascinating episode. Quick reminder to rate, review, and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening. You can also find the full videos of the show on our YouTube page. If you learned something from Kevin, Otis, or me in our conversation, make sure to share the episode with someone else so they can learn it too. This episode is brought to you by Tribe and Purpose. The transition from college to that first career is a difficult one, and it's even harder when you lose your sense of identity. If you're an athlete who just hung up the cleats, it's hard to go from being a rugby player to being Joe in accounting. We created Next is Best to help retired college athletes use their skills to create an impact through entrepreneurship. Next is Best by Know Your Tribe will help to smoothen that rough transition by helping you establish a clear sense of purpose, an actionable path to success, and the tools you need to manage your life. Your 20s are a confusing and chaotic time. Next is Best gives you the tools you need to make sense of that chaos and make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. You can learn more about Next is Best by Know Your Tribe at findyourpurpose.coach. That's findyourpurpose.coach. Now here's Cam and Otis with the show.
Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis show. Man, I say this a lot, but dadgummit, I get excited when I have a good friend on, and I'm just looking forward to the fun we're going to have with Kevin. Just learned how to say his last name properly, Knebl, a.k.a. Knebl, because I've been saying it that way for about 10 years or so. Kevin, man, it is great to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you, Otis. Even I mispronounce my name, and Cam might not be old enough to remember this, but there was a guy named Evel Knievel. And for years, when I was in high school, my nickname was Kevin Knievel, so I'm used to being called everything under the sun. It's great to be here.
Well, and if you were like me, you would have worn that badge proudly. I mean, that's one of those nicknames. Yep. Oh yeah, call me that.
As I said, I've heard all the stories, so I'm guessing we want to stick with the Knebl mispronunciation, help with the SEO and all that kind of stuff.
or you can just call me Evil.
No one does that though.
So, Kevin, I want to jump into this with the origin of LinkedIn and you, because that is such a fun story. Most people don't understand that, hey, LinkedIn started somewhere and somebody was an early adopter. Tell us how that happened with you.
Yeah. Well, what happened was LinkedIn launched on Cinco de Mayo, the 5th of May, 2003. And I'm not a computer geek, but I had a friend of mine who sent me an invitation to get on LinkedIn in July of 2003 when it had only been around for about 60 days. So I get on LinkedIn for the very first time in July of 2003, and I look at it and I say, oh my gosh, it's a Rolodex. Now, for that new breed of human beings, often referred to as millennials, back in the old days, before Al Gore invented the internet, we used to have this thing called Rolodexes that you would put business cards on. And I had already had, we might get into this in a little bit, or maybe we won't, I don't know, but I had already developed a deep understanding of networking, relationship building, what to do with a Rolodex. So when I was presented with LinkedIn in 2003, I said to myself, this is going to be a really handy tool in business. I never imagined that I would ultimately leave my job and write books and travel around the world and be on television and all this other stuff. I just looked at LinkedIn like a really good business tool. But yeah, I got on LinkedIn 19 years. Can you believe LinkedIn's been around for almost 20 years? Next year, LinkedIn will be 21 and it will be old enough to drink.
Yeah, that is amazing because I think back to sitting in my transition class out of the Army.
Yeah.
And they said, "Oh, you gotta do the LinkedIn thing." Yeah. And I think I told you this the other night when we were catching up. I saw something. I think actually Miss Suzanne saw something that this guy was talking about LinkedIn, and it was free. And I'm all about the free stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you were giving a talk up in South Denver, Littleton, or one of them places, and we went there, and I was like, "Whoa, that!" And that was after it had been around for 8, 9, maybe 10 years, and it was still kind of this new thing. You manage though, and this is where I'm having fun with this, because I'm looking at where you were as a lounge lizard and where you are today, and how I called you out, and how you went from this massive business sales guy and an entertainer over here, and you've pulled that talent into what you're doing, your purpose. I mean, it really is now. How did you pull all that stuff together, man?
I have no idea.
All right, next question.
So just for the viewers, so they understand what you just said there, what I used to do for a living many years ago was I used to be a piano player in the New York City area. So my background is music. So I'm a classically trained piano player. And in the early 90s, when I got married and I started having kids, I figured out that playing piano wasn't going to really support my family. So I had to get a different job than playing piano. But again, this was prior to the internet. So back in the old days, Otis, you might remember this, we would get newspapers and look at the help wanteds and the classified ads, and the only jobs I could find were 100% commission sales jobs, and I didn't even know what that meant. So if I can be frank, is it okay if I'm frank, guys? Me going from right-brained artsy-fartsy piano player to getting into sales, a sex change would have been more in my comfort zone, okay? but you do what you gotta do, right? So I cut off my 18-inch long hair, and I went to work in sales, and I threw up every morning on my way to my first sales call because I was so out of my comfort zone, scared out of my mind. But I had some good mentors, and my mentors taught me, and this is really important because this is really the heart of everything I teach. My mentors taught me, Kevin, no matter how much you know about your product or service, that's never really going to ultimately lead you to success. And that confused me because I was like, well, I just assumed that the person that makes the best coffee mugs would have the most successful coffee mug business, or the person that makes the best pens would have the best pen business. But they said, Kev, look around. That's not true. There's plenty of people out there who are technically very good at their chosen profession, but they still struggle to bring on clients and get referrals. So I asked them, well, I know there's no guarantees in life, but what would help me be more successful? And they said, always be deepening your understanding of your profession, but always also be deepening your understanding of how to create relationships with people in a sincere and authentic way. So I never really studied the typical sales kind of stuff that most people in sales study. I went and I got How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, written back in 1936. And I read it over and over and over. Matter of fact, 30 years later now, I still read it over and over. And I went from never having sold a thing in my life to a couple of years later, I was the top salesperson for 4 different companies in 4 different industries, including being the top salesperson in the world for an international consulting company with over 350 salespeople in 15 countries. So I had a very, very successful sales career, but not because I was slick and salesy. the reason that I've done quite well in sales is because I understand that it's always about creating sincere and authentic know, like, trust, or what I call the KLT factor. It's kind of a long answer to your question, Otis, but that's, I got into sales. I never in a million years would have imagined I would have gotten into sales. I did well in sales because I wasn't salesy. Then I was presented with LinkedIn in 2003, started playing around with that. Businesses started saying, hey, could you come and teach us how to increase our sales without being salesy? Could you teach us how to use LinkedIn for lead generation and referral creation? And here we are 20 years later. But life's funny, man. You never know. I mean, every time you think you got it figured out, somebody's going to throw a curveball at you, Does that make sense?
That makes me think of, oh, definitely. And it makes me think of something I was reading recently in an essay by the economist Frank Knight. And he says this really interesting thing talking about defining economics as like want satisfying, and goes through all of, the issues with treating it with that simple definition. And one of the things he talks about is that there's no objective reason to do anything. Just like there's no objective reason to believe anything. And I think that's a problem that a lot of people fall into when it comes to sales, especially. And then there's a whole other philosophical life side to that statement. But especially in the aspect of sales, that you come in and you say, if I can just explain it the best, they'll want it. If I just create the best product, they'll want it. You can have the best thing. We talked about LinkedIn being an early adopter. You can have the best thing. Doesn't mean anyone's going to want it. You have to give them that reason to want it, because there's no objectivity around the utility of the product there. And what I think is really interesting there is you talk about building that personal touch and going through and learning that. I want to know, were you ever tempted to kind of go to the dark side of the sales? Because you weren't the sales guy, and then you kind of opened up the book, and we all know the stories of people who read those same psychology books and go that whole other direction on the sales, and they, go full Wolf of Wall Street on it. Did you have that point where you were looking at it like, gosh, there's a lot of money here if I just, swallow my pride a little bit and become a little bit more, scummy salesman?
That's Cam, that's a really good question. I have been blessed to be interviewed countless times over the years, and I have never had anyone ever ask me that question. That's a really, really good question. Yes, the answer to your question is yes. When you're broke and people are dangling money in front of you, the mind can do some interesting things, okay? But I learned something a long time ago. I learned that if something does not feel right, it is probably not a good long-term strategy. Now, that might sound ridiculously oversimplified, but let me make a point. Gravity is ridiculously oversimplified too, right? Every time I drop this, it's going to go down 100% of the time, no matter where on this planet I am, whether I'm black, white, old, young, hairy, bald, fat, skinny. Gravity is a principle. Most people follow strategies and techniques without an understanding of the underlying principle. Now, that sounds deep and philosophical. It's not. It's really ridiculously simple. So I was very fortunate that many years ago, I started noticing that when I would either intentionally or unintentionally violate or attempt to violate a principle, because you can't break a principle. You can only break yourself against a principle. I started noticing that when I was trying to cut around a principle or shortcut it, it always came back to bite me. So I guess I made some kind of an agreement with myself years ago that if I stuck to my guns and I focused on principles as much as I could, that doesn't mean life was always going to be a bowl of cherries and I'd be, skipping through fields of daisies. But I had enough evidence in my life that if I stuck to principles, long term things would work out. So, Cam, when I was presented with, here's a lot of money over here, Kevin, if you just become a jerk, I said, I'm sticking to my principles. I'm going to focus on building sincere and authentic know-like trust with people, and I'm going to trust that God and the universe has my back. And I go through crap just like everybody else does, but I sleep very well at night. I have no problem going to sleep because I know I'm not screwing anybody. I'm not, because it's not always about lying. Sometimes it's a lie of omission, right? So it's not always what we say. Sometimes we don't say things, and that's just as much of a lie as lying, right? So I'm not a saint. I guarantee you, there's some rust on my halo, okay? But I do understand that if I focus on good principles, the universe has my back. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, and that's such a foundational thing. That's something I talk with my clients about all the time, is those values. And I was right there. I didn't have that understanding because the Army issued me my values, and then I got when I left the Army, I turned those values back in. And then I went out in the business world, and I'd get this pit in my gut when things didn't feel right. And that was now reflecting back on it. Now I know what that was, and that was going against whether it was me doing it or somebody I was associated in the business doing it, but going against those values, those principles is, man, it eats at your soul. And that's a powerful place to live when here's mine. And yes, I don't always, but I know when I do, it doesn't feel very good.
Can I make a quick comment on that?
Please.
So in my world, there's really two things that I do. In my world, I spend a lot of time speaking on stages all around the world and coaching around sales, LinkedIn, networking, that kind of stuff. But I also do a lot of work with my clients in terms of helping them understand how the mind and thought works. Because I've really spent decades deepening my understanding on how the mind and thought works. So I'm not trying to be woo-woo here at all. But there's something you just said, Otis, that I think might be good for people to hear from a different angle. When you would feel that pit in your stomach, most things I say are ridiculously simple, okay? Because I've never had any challenge in my life, in any area of my life, financial, health, relationships, spirituality. I've never had, and I doubt anyone listening to this has ever had a challenge in their life that they solved by adding complexity to it. Okay? So I keep things simple. That feeling that was the pit in your stomach, that was no mistake. That was no accident. But what I find in our society, and I'm going to say something broad, okay, because there will be people that will watch this interview and try to poke holes in what I'm about to say. But take this broad. We as a society, and especially men, we have often been taught to ignore our feelings, okay, and push them down and just become much more cognitive, much more and there's a time and a place for the brain and the heart, and I get it, right? But that pit that feeling in your stomach was a wake-up call that going in that direction was the wrong way to go. And we have plenty of evidence in our society on a daily basis where people override that internal feeling that's telling them what you're about to do is not going to end up well, right? But they do it anyway. So it's really helpful for people to deepen their understanding of not only the mind, but also the heart, And those feelings are there for a reason. It's not, it's not mushy woo-woo kind of stuff. There's a reason why something inside of us is going, I don't know, and it might make sense to listen to that. I could go on for hours on that, but I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
There's the really interesting, physiological response of the disgust of it's really what your mind is interpreting that thing as and where that feeling comes from. But it kind of makes me think of something, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this, Kevin, because this is a little bit of I'm the young whippersnapper asking the more philosophical questions. Right? Yeah, I know. I'll get off your lawn. But do you think principles need to be subconscious or conscious? And what I mean by that is when we talk about that feeling, it's really a subconscious thing that you're not thinking about that much. And then when the time comes, you trust your gut when it really comes down to it. And then the other end of the spectrum, when I think about the person who's really conscious about it, I almost think, it almost reaches the annoying extent of you're trying to get lunch with your buddy and he's like, well, which fast food option is really the morally superior one here? Because I'm trying to get into heaven. Therefore, if that burger's made a little bit cleaner than this burger, then that means that and it's okay, calm down, man, just eat a damn burger. There's the extremes there where you want to have, just living the life, and you don't want those principles, those values constantly weighing on every little decision. Because also getting into the moral aspect there, it's really hard to make the right decision when you have so many layers of complexity there. So do you think it needs to be something that is subconscious, conscious? How do you interpret that?
Again, we could probably go for hours on this. So
and we might.
I have a long history of going down rabbit holes. Okay, and I have a long history of keeping things simple. So let me say a couple things that might sound radical, but in a world of lies, the truth is radical. Mm-hmm. Okay, I don't see any use in even discussing the subconscious, because by definition, it's subconscious. Now let that sink in for a second. Why would we spend any time trying to psychoanalyze something that by definition we can't talk about? Just let that sink in for a second. Because until something becomes a conscious thought, by definition, it doesn't exist. Does that make sense? But people will pontificate for hours and lifetimes about all this subconscious shit and blah, 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 but they're just shooting in the dark. Because until something becomes a thought, by definition, it literally doesn't exist. So the way I would answer your question, Cam, is there is a lot more practical value in deepening your understanding of thought than not the content of your thought. We can talk about that in a moment, right? Not this thought versus that thought, or this belief versus that belief, or this faith. See, 99.9% of the people on this planet will spend their time discussing the content of their thoughts without ever pausing for a second and asking themselves, what is thought to begin with? Mm-hmm. Now, this might sound woo-woo, but this is what I have deepened my understanding of over the years. Most people are actually studying with good intentions. They're actually studying the wrong thing. Because if you think about it, every experience you've ever had in your life, and every experience you're ever going to have in your life, by definition will be processed through your mind and thought. No exceptions, 100% of the time. But if you were to look at most people's understanding of mind and thought, it's almost non-existent. So if you really think about that, most people are operating through life with a complete lack of understanding of how life even works. Now that sounds woo-woo. Oh no, it's the most practical thing you could ever understand. Because wouldn't you agree with me that the more you understand how something works, the more skillfully you could use it? Whether it's a power drill, whether it's a gun, whether it's a pen. Well, only an idiot would disagree with that. So if the more you understand how something works, the more skillfully you can use it, which makes total sense. And then you look around, and I'm not trying to make people right or wrong or smart or stupid, but just common sense would say, if you went up to most people and you were to ask them, have you spent any time in your life studying the mind or thought? 99% of the people that you talk to would say, no, I've never spent any time studying that. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't have to say this out loud to them because they would take it as a criticism, but at least you would understand they're clueless. They have no understanding. But it's not that you're being mean, you're actually agreeing with what they just said, right? Now, this sounds very woo-woo. See, there's an irony going on here. People look at me and I'll say certain things sometimes, and people look at me like, oh, Kevin's a hippie, right? And I go, well, I sound like a hippie, but I'm not. I'm talking about a subject that most people have no understanding of. But when I help, see, when we get a little bit of understanding of how the mind and thought works, some of the benefits of that are clarity. Wouldn't common sense say that if you have more clarity, you'll make better decisions in your personal life and in your business life? That just makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. The less clarity you have, by definition, the more you're just shooting in the dark, right? So it sounds woo-woo, but it's extremely practical. The more we understand a little bit about how the mind and thought works, the more our life is going to work more smoothly, because we're not just rolling dice and hoping something's going to work out. We're actually approaching situations in our life with more of an understanding of clarity, which is going to lead to better outcomes. Cam, I don't think I answered your question. What was your question again?
I got some stuff to add, and I want to get back and rephrase the question in a different way, because I love the answer there, because you're totally right. What it reminds me of a lot is this, and I think it's originally an old fable, but it has all sorts of different origins. For me, I found it during a Sturgill Simpson song, but the phrase is "turtles all the way down," and what it refers to is back when people were thinking the world was flat, and people would say, okay, well, why are we moving then through the stars? And they go, well, it's on a turtle. Well, what's the turtle on? Well, a turtle. And the reason I always loved it so much is not because I think we're living on the back of a turtle walking through the universe or anything like that, but because it talks about the pointlessness of endless questions, and how we kind of tend to pick at things and spend time picking at things rather than applying things. And that's why I love it so much, because it's not, we talk about whether it's subconscious or it's conscious. I think the more important piece there, and I want to see if you agree with me on this, Kevin, is it's not why we do it that's important, or how we do it that is important. It's if you do it or if you don't. And whether it's subconscious or it's conscious, if it's in your thoughts, then it's going to become a piece of your life. Would you agree with that interpretation?
I would, because most people have a fundamental misunderstanding of thought. They think, you see, because thought appears so real, most people treat thought as if it's fact and reality. Okay? Now again, I'm not talking woo-woo here. But when you have a thought, 99% of the time, you will not identify it as a thought. You will identify it as fact and reality. Because the mind is so powerful that when you think a thought, if you are unaware that it's a thought, it will appear to be reality. Now, again, this might sound woo-woo to people, but it's not. It's very practical. I'll give you a very simple, again, I'm going to say some things, and I know that your tribe can handle this. When someone walks into a nightclub or a school and starts shooting children, I can tell you with 100% accuracy why that happened. We can psychoanalyze their background, their upbringing. We can look at, broken households. We can look at all this stuff. But I will tell you something as true as gravity. The reason that person did that is because they had that thought, they considered that to be fact, and they acted on it. Now, Kevin, Kevin, it's not that simple. You want to bet? This isn't that simple either, huh? But every time I drop it, it goes down. That's a principle, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, what I help my clients do is question thought. Not to make it right or wrong, but just to be cognizant enough and awake enough to realize what I'm thinking is a thought. Should I act on this or should I not act on this based on my values and principles? Because the mind is very tricky. It's not tricky, it's slippery. It'll make things appear real that are just thought. So what most people don't understand is that thoughts are like clouds in the sky. They come and they go. To use a metaphor, most people think they are the clouds. No, you are the sky. You are the sky through which clouds come and clouds go. Okay? You have never had a thought or a feeling that lasted forever. And you're never going to. And there's a lot of wisdom in understanding that. But in the moment, when you're having the thought or the feeling, it feels like eternity. It feels like I'm never going to lose this feeling, right? Something bad happens and you just feel like, it's always going to feel this way. And you innocently forget, this too shall pass, right? There's no cloud, no plane, no rocket ship has ever scarred the sky. The sky is just fine. Clouds go through it, planes go through it, birds go through it, but most humans are just innocently unaware of that. Oh, I've got trauma. Again, I'm not trying to get, we can get into PTSD and all this other stuff, okay? But in reality, you and I and every other human being on this planet is living in a thought-generated reality moment to moment to moment.
This episode is brought to you by Tribe and Purpose. If you're a college athlete who just hung up the cleats and you're looking to make an impact as an entrepreneur, then Next is Best by Another Tribe is perfect for you. Get a clear sense of purpose and a path to success so you can make a bigger impact and make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. Learn more today at findyourpurpose.coach. Now let's get I want to, but Dad, before you go, I want to say one thing just to add to the metaphor, talking about the clouds and when you said trauma and stuff. What it makes me think of, just to help paint the metaphor a little bit more, is for you talk about the chemical imbalances like we were talking about on that episode a couple weeks ago, Dad. That's just a wind pattern. Like the clouds are still moving and whatnot. You got this strong wind pattern you got to deal with, but it's still just you're the sky, And I think that's an important way of looking at it.
I'm not denying that there are chemical imbalances. I'm not denying that there are, what I'm saying though is every human being on this planet, whether they're in good mental health or bad mental health, every single one of us is living in a thought-generated reality moment to moment to moment. And as woo-woo as that might sound to some people, I can't think of anything more practical than understanding that.
It just reminds me of, I don't know if I call it one of my favorite books, but I reference it a lot, so it must be one of my favorite books. It's called The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Waddle.
Great book.
Yeah. And the whole thesis of the book or the theme of the book is if you can visualize it, it will become true. And that is exactly what we're talking about. The thought is just a thought until we decide to change the thought into action. And that's when we decide to change the thought into action, that's where we're making difference.
That's right, Otis. That what you just said is profound in its implications.
It is. And again, in keeping with your principle, it's simple, right?
It's simple. Matter of fact, the truth is always simple, and the truth will set you free. By definition, if you're trying to solve a problem and you're not looking in the you're not looking in the direction of simplicity, you are literally looking in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Dad, there's a question I want to ask in the same vein, kind of bringing it back to the business world. We mentioned, the turtles all the way down to endless questions. So that's a pattern you could fall into a business, the paralysis by analysis.
Yes.
What would you say is the sign that it's time to stop asking those questions and take action?
Perfect question, because this ties exactly into what Otis said 10 minutes ago. It's the feeling. It's the feeling. So let me say something that's going to sound so ridiculously simple. But let me also say that very few people walking this planet understand what I'm about to say. Feelings are an echo of thought. Let me give you an example. Most people, when they're stuck in traffic, they think that the traffic is causing the anxiety and the stress inside them. When Miss Suzanne shoots Otis a look, and Otis knows the look, right?
Oh, yeah.
When she shoots him a look and he gets a feeling, she didn't create that feeling. What happened was, in his mind, he had a thought, even if it was like at the speed of light. What most people do not understand, and it's not because they're stupid, it's just that it's not something they've ever spent any time studying. Most people have no understanding that feelings are echoes of thoughts. It is impossible to have a good feeling when you're thinking a bad thought, and it's impossible to have a bad feeling when you're thinking a good thought. Now, what I'm saying is so ridiculously simple and obvious, but so is gravity, right? So it's amazing when you think about it. We have all the evidence in the universe staring us in the face, telling us situations, relationships, and circumstances cannot create feelings in you. Yet people still cling to a belief, and we might want to explore the word belief in a couple seconds. People cling to a belief. Oh, my bank account is creating a feeling in my body. That is insane. How is a number on a ledger sheet going to convert into a feeling in your body? You see, if circumstances could create feelings, then everyone would have the same feeling. It's like gravity. It's a principle. But when you're stuck in traffic and you see some people are pissed off, but other people are playing air drums on their steering wheel, by definition, some people are totally stressed out in the traffic and some people aren't stressed out. The traffic is not creating the stress. What's creating the stress is the way people are thinking about the traffic. Now, let me say one more thing and then I'll shut up for a second. I am not saying that we should be trying to control our thinking. I'm saying that trying to control your thinking is a waste of time. Deepening your understanding of thought itself is where the gold is. Most of us in personal development are taught to try to control our thinking, spin our thinking, reframe, all this stuff, all with good intentions, without ever once stopping and going, what's thought? So we're innocently taught, in our culture to try to control our thinking. That's like trying to control the clouds. That's crazy. Wouldn't it be smarter to deepen your understanding of thought itself so that when thought shows up, you can see it for what it is? And then you can make an intelligent decision. Should I act on this thought, or should I just let that cloud go by? I'm not saying it's the easiest thing in the world. It's very difficult at first. But once you catch on to the trick, it becomes easier and easier. So Cam, your feelings are an indication of the quality of your thinking in the moment. If you feel an anxious feeling, that's not telling you about a situation. It's telling you about your thinking about the situation. Does that make sense?
I love that. And I love my favorite example of this, and I've used this with some of my clients in coaching before, is people who will say that coffee gives them anxiety. And it's no, you have a physiological cue, which is caffeine will get your heart pumping. And you have anxiety, or you have anxious tendencies, and therefore your brain jumps to that neuron highway that says heart rate going up means panic. And it's like those are two very different things. It's like you're saying, understanding where that thought is really coming from, not trying to disentangle the thought itself, but rather what is that thought. I love that so much.
When you can see that it's thought, it automatically, by definition, provides clarity. If you can't see that it's thought, you are literally shooting in the dark. Okay. Again, we could go for hours on this.
Oh yeah.
The irony is it sounds complex, but it's really simple. We just get faked out 1,000 times a day. Where, I got a deadline, I got to hit this out, I'm all stressed out. No, you've got a deadline. And by definition, the more clarity you have around that, the greater the likelihood that you will make an intelligent decision. But the less clarity you have around that, the more it's like doing 5 shots of tequila and hoping you can drive, right? It's probably not going to end well, right? But let me say one more thing. Have you ever noticed that you've never become more clear thinking when you get mad? But in the moment, when we're pissed off, we're so sure that we're right. But in reality, when we sober up mentally, we realize, holy crap, I have never once in my life realized clarity as a result of being mad. Clarity is a result of calmness, of peace of mind. That is clarity. Being pissed and agitated, that doesn't lead to clarity. That's like doing 5 shots of tequila and hoping that you're going to make the right decision. You and I have been around long enough to know that we can look back at our life and we can see where we've made major decisions at major stress inflection points. And some of them might have worked out well and some of them didn't work out well, but only somebody that's in total denial would say to themselves, when I was really pissed, I made the right decision. No, you were flying by the seat of your pants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, anger puts blinders on.
Exactly.
Right? And you see one solution, and that's retaliation.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And
and I'm not saying that retaliation sometimes isn't the appropriate choice, right?
But it's a choice. That's the whole point of this.
Right.
Is it's a choice, and truthfully, you said this, but the way I like to phrase it is it's a skill. It's not easy. It's a skill that requires effort and complete refining it, practice, awareness of it. And it reminds me of Viktor Frankl's quote about the gap between stimulus and reaction, and in that gap we get to make the choice. And when you start to think about that is so powerful that it's my choice.
It's life-changing. It's literally life-changing. And what you're talking about with Frankel in that gap is the Pavlovian dog thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we all know about the Pavlovian dog, where they ring the bell and it makes the dog salivate, right? Not to be crass, but that is how 99.9% of the humans on this planet live their life day by day. They are unaware that they are literally Pavlovian dogs moment to moment to moment.
How did you, in this, and I'm referring to it as being a student of the game, because I think back to when I started coaching rugby and had no clue what I was doing, and I just became a student of the game. I dove into it. One of the things that happens to business leaders, particularly somebody like yourself, because you admitted this also, is rabbit holes.
Yeah.
How do you control that path of curiosity to where it is, maybe it's a cardinal direction. Maybe you can get it down to a cardinal direction. I don't know if you can get it down to a 4-lane highway, but how do you do that so that you can stay focused in that realm of curiosity?
Well, I'm definitely curious. Yeah, I'm definitely a very curious individual. Okay, so again, I'm going to say something really super simple. It looks to me like all roads lead to an understanding of thought. It sounds like I'm a one-trick pony, but there's really only one trick going on. If you look around at the world, there is a preponderance of evidence, which is just a fancy $5 word for a lot of evidence, that most people have no understanding of how thought works. Now, that doesn't say that I'm some enlightened Buddha and I've got it all figured out. It's just saying I've noticed that almost everybody is looking in the wrong direction. And what's interesting, Otis, is that when we deepen our understanding of thought, it actually increases the curiosity. There's an irony here, right? It sounds like, oh, the more I understand it's all thought, the less curious I would be. No. Actually, it becomes more and more fascinating to see and to be able to help people alleviate suffering, right? That's really what I help people do. To use a metaphor, I feel like I'm walking through the world, I'm seeing most people sleepwalking, and I'm lightly tapping them on the shoulder and saying, wake up, right? You're taking your thoughts to be reality, and therefore you're suffering. The suffering is not coming from your bank account. The suffering is not coming from your spouse. Suffering is not coming from Putin or from COVID. The suffering is coming from a simple misunderstanding. It's a false causal relationship. We all understand cause and effect. But most people are attributing an effect to a cause that doesn't work. So the more you understand this, it doesn't decrease curiosity. It actually helps understand curiosity. I'm not quite sure if I'm answering what you said, Otis. I hope I am. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you are, because it is the more you understand, the more you want to understand, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that was interesting.
Yeah. That's a good way of saying it.
To know more unknowns.
Yeah, that's a good way. That's a really good way of saying it, right? It's almost like if you were a hunter. If you were a hunter and you were hunting for elk, and you got a 12-point elk, you're not going to give up hunting and go, well, I got my 12-point elk. I guess I already checked this box off. I'm done. No, you like hunting, right? You're going to go out and do some more hunting, right? So it's the same thing with this. Once you catch on to the trick that we're all living in a thought-generated reality moment to moment to moment, it just becomes more interesting. Yeah. Because you can help people more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kevin, you got me thinking of something that it's full disclosure is something I've been formulating a bit, and so this might not be as clear as I want it to be. But you talking about the the importance of understanding thought, and that go in that whole direction, right?
Yeah.
One thing that I've been thinking about is how many different problems that are basically just poor decision making, when you really get down to it, are caused by not a lack of understanding of our thoughts, but a lack of understanding that other people have that same level of complexity in their thoughts. Would you agree with that statement, that a lot of that poor decision making and those problems come from not projecting the same complexity onto other people?
Well, let me use a metaphor, Cam. Tell me if this helps.
Gotcha.
If you were in a world of people sleepwalking, but you were awake, and I'm not talking about being woke, any of that bullshit, right? If you were in a world where you were awake, but you saw that almost everybody else was asleep, number one, you would understand that it would not be intelligent to just automatically do what they say, not because they're stupid, but because they're asleep, right? But you would also, and what would happen is you would naturally become more compassionate of other people. Because, so Otis, when Cam was a little boy, did he ever wake up in the middle of the night scared? Maybe he had a bad dream and he came into the bedroom with you and your wife?
I had night terrors, Kevin.
I was going to say you have to ask Miss Suzanne, because I probably slept through it. But
so I'm going to predict. Okay, I'm going to predict, because every parent has had this happen. When your son woke up in the middle of the night, terrified because he had a bad dream, and he came into the bedroom, and he said, "Mommy, Daddy, there's a monster in my room." At that moment, a couple things happened. You knew there was no monster in his room, but you also knew that he believed that there was a monster in his room. So at that moment, you had a couple of choices. You could have said to little Cam, you could have said, "Hey, stupid, monsters don't exist. Go get your ass back in bed." But you wouldn't say that, because that would be very unloving, you wouldn't say that, okay? You could have sat him down and giving him a lecture on the non-existence of monsters. But you wouldn't do that either. You probably grabbed him and said, "Sleep with Mommy and I here tonight. Everything's going to be okay." You brought him into the bed. You put him between you and Suzanne, and because you had compassion. Because what you saw was that he was operating under a belief. By the way, we're talking about the same thing we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes. He was operating under a belief that he considered to be true, because he had no understanding of thought. He had a thought enter into his mind, "There's monsters." Because it was a thought and it looked so real, it was real to him. There's a monster that's going to kill him under the bed. He came into your room because you had a deeper understanding that there's no monsters. There's no monster in the closet that's going to kill him. But you weren't going to call him stupid. You weren't going to give him a lecture on the non-existence of monsters. You understood at that moment, because he was just a little boy, you had compassion for him. Okay? Are you with me so far? Now, the guy that walks into a school and kills a bunch of children, I am in no way condoning that behavior, but I have compassion for that man, because he was suffering, living in a hell in his mind. Again, you have to be careful with this, because some people can hear what I'm saying and thinking that I'm not condoning the behavior at all. But I'm saying I have compassion for him, because only a person that is suffering at such a deep level would have the ability to go kill a bunch of little children. Okay? Now, what we're talking about right now is the world. As you look at the world, as you look at every situation you see going on in your personal life, on an international level, Putin shooting bombs into the Ukraine, why is Putin doing that? Because he's having a thought and he doesn't have the understanding of how to question the validity of the thought, right? Hitler did the same thing, right? Hitler, how did Hitler kill 6 million Jews? He had a crazy thought. He didn't realize it was crazy. He had never been taught to question his thoughts. By the way, you and I were never taught to question our thoughts either, right? No. But I run around the world teaching people how to question their thoughts, not to make them wrong or right, but just to see them for what they are. Once you see what it is, then you have the ability to evaluate, as you said very correctly, Otis, then you have a choice. Until you see it for what it is, you don't have a choice. You're drunk. You're mentally drunk, right? There's no choice involved. But the moment you see it for what it is, then you can make a choice. Do I want to go down this road or do I not want to go down this road? But when you have a thought that you believe is totally real, choice has left the equation. You are going down that road, okay? And that's gambling. That's high stakes gambling. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the truest sense of the word, the way I like to think of it is they are ignorant.
Yes.
And they're ignorant in the sense of they have never been exposed to this. They've never been educated on this. Not in a derogatory way, but the fact that they just, hey, you know what? How about I show you this? How about you listen to Kevin and his talk? How about you pick up a book from the library?
Ignorance has nothing to do with intelligence. We said this 45 minutes ago.
Yeah.
I asked you guys a question. Would you agree with me that the more you understand how something works, the more skillfully you can use it? We're talking about the difference between ignorance and non-ignorance. That's it. Ignorance is not, but because most people are so sensitive. Oh, you use the word ignorant. You think I'm stupid. No. Ignorance, I am... Otis, have you fired a lot of guns in your life?
Oh, yeah.
I've fired maybe 100. I've probably shot 100 rounds in my life. You've probably shot 100,000. I have ignorance. I have ignorance as it relates to firearms. That doesn't mean I'm stupid. It just means you have an expertise in an area that I don't. Cam, you know rugby, right, Cam?
Yes, sir.
I've never played rugby. If I went out on a rugby field, I'd get my ass kicked, right? But so I have ignorance as it relates to rugby, right? It has nothing to do with intelligence, right? You weren't born, Cam, understanding rugby. You learned rugby. You developed a knowledge of rugby, right? Otis developed a knowledge of leadership principles. I've developed a knowledge of sales, networking, mind, thought. We all have expertise in various areas, but in the areas we don't have expertise, we're ignorant. It's no more complex than that. Yeah.
And when you admit that you're ignorant about something, then you can learn about
Absolutely.
it. And that's I won't even try to do the Stoic quote on that because I'm flubbing it up. But just know that Marcus Aurelius did say something along those lines. In summary, if you're ignorant, if you think you know, then you can't learn what you don't know.
And isn't
that
just like a black belt in common sense?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I saw a really interesting I say graphic like it was official. It's no more than a meme really, but it was a pie chart, and it had these two really small slices at the top, and it said what you know, and then it said what you know that you don't know, and then the whole rest of it was what you don't know that you don't know. And that is the best way you could think about this. It's just ignorance. You don't know it. There's no problem with that. You just genuinely don't know. How can you blame someone if they don't know something? You know?
Because I'm gonna say something that's gonna sound woo woo. Because most people have a very limited understanding of themselves. By definition, they have a very limited understanding of others.
Mm-hmm. That makes me think, and I was thinking about saying this earlier when we were talking about compassion. And you were talking about the school shooter and that type. I've heard this. I think it's Buddhist. I don't know that much Buddhism, but the thought of you want to learn how to love the murderer in the world, learn how to love the serial killer and this type of thing. And what I always thought was so interesting from that is that it always seemed to me like it was just an exercise in learning how to love yourself. Because if you can figure out how to love someone else with all those flaws and understand their line of thinking and with a situation, go down that whole rabbit hole, then it's a way to then understand yourself. So I totally agree with that.
Cam, what you just said is so profound and it's so accurate. You can't give someone something you don't have. So if you don't understand yourself to some degree, how the hell are you going to understand anybody else? I mean, duh. Most people are so busy pointing the finger at everybody else instead of just taking a couple minutes and sitting down and going, let me kind of understand myself a little better. Because only to the level I understand myself could I ever understand anybody else. Right? I mean, if you think about that, that just makes sense. Right? Yeah.
Well, in the interest of doing good and mitigating ignorance in the world, and mitigating my own ignorance, I learned, and I love this phrase, Kevin, because you've taken that feeling that I've described, and I do it with my clients all the time. That feeling I've described of going against my own principles, and helping me understand that even better is if it doesn't feel right, it isn't a good long-term strategy. I mean, it's so true in that sense.
Yeah. If it
Camden, how about you? Go ahead, Kevin.
If it doesn't feel right, it might be an indication that maybe you should pause.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And just kind of look at, and not overanalyze it and do a whole Freudian analysis on it. But I've kind of noticed that when I'm making good decisions, there's a feeling of peace that comes with that. Yeah.
Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, and this is kind of broad, but Kevin, you really reinforced something that I too like to simplify things into these weird little phrases, and there's so much to be said for the just ridiculously simple truth. Like one example that comes to mind, I use this a lot talking with friends whenever there's a disagreement and people are talking, they're kind of talking past each other. I have this phrase I use with a lot of my friends, which are, well, words are just words. You guys are both just saying different words to each other. And like, that's the stupidest. That's hippy dippy. It's like, no. What it is you're encoding and they're decoding and you're encoding and decoding differently. And like, there's so much complexity to that. But you can explain it so much better through the simple thing. And I love that. Like your example of gravity just like gravity, there's so much complexity to it. I took a lot of astronomy classes. There's some complexities to gravity. And at the same time, the best thing you can do is just understand the simple version and then keep moving and take that movement forward. So that's what I learned today.
Yeah.
Awesome. How about you, Kevin? What'd you learn?
Here's what I learned, Otis. And thank you for giving me this learning opportunity. I learned that it's really not so much of a learning as a deepening of a learning. I continued to deepen my learning that regardless of whatever situation is in your life or whatever realm you're in, whether it's rugby, whether it's leadership, whatever it is, gravity only works one way, right? So it could look like, well, in Otis's world is very different than Kevin's world or Cam's world. But is it really? I don't think it really is. The situations might look different. They might appear different. But in reality, it's the same thing going on. People are operating at whatever level of understanding they have in the moment. And it's really helpful for us to be able to, we won't always remember that. We'll get faked out. I get faked out all the time. But the more we can understand that unless somebody's truly psychotic, okay, they're doing the best that they can in the moment at their level of understanding of thought. They really are. They're doing the best that they can. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, what kind of really stupid decisions could I make today? Right? We just all, we're doing the best that we can moment to moment to moment. And the more you understand that, the more you become the mental designated driver. I've never said it that way before, but I like that mental designated driver thing. You know, the sober person should be driving, right? It doesn't mean that you're an enlightened Buddha or you've got the universe figured out or you walk on water. But the most sober person should be the person with the keys, right? So if you understand that most people are kind of half awake, you don't necessarily have to call them out on it to make them feel stupid or anything like that, but at least you understand the fact that they're suffering would be an indication that they're not fully awake. And just love them. That's what I learned.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, and I'll just reemphasize that. Just love them.
Yeah,
I mean, what a powerful, simple thing that we can all do.
Yeah.
Kevin, how do folks find you? What's the best way to get in contact with you? See what you got going on next.
They can't find me, man. I'm in the witness relocation program. So no, I came out of the witness relocation program a long time ago. If they go on there's this new thing called the internet. It's going to be big. If they go on the internet and they type in Kevin Knebl, Knebl is 5 letters, Knebl. Could I please buy another vowel? If they type Kevin Knebl into Google, they'll find me. If they go to kevinknebl.com, that's my website. It's severely in need of an update. The website needs to be updated, but it's good enough. They can find me on Facebook. They can find me on LinkedIn. Please feel free to send me a LinkedIn invitation. Maybe another time we'll get together. We'll talk about how to use LinkedIn to grow your business or whatever. But I'm very, very easy to find. I'm always a phone call or an email away. If anybody ever wants to talk about anything under the sun, call me, email me, text me. I travel extensively. I'm asked to speak in about 1 city per week all around the world. But if anybody reaches out to me, I give you my word as a gentleman, I will reply. It might take me a little bit because I travel so much, but I give you my word as a gentleman. If you reach out to me, I'll absolutely reply. And I just appreciate your time and your attention. And Otis and Cam, this has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. We need to get together and do a couple tequila shots.
There you go.
Yes, sir.
I think Camden might have a good source for some tequila down there in Tucson.
Go. Yes, sir. We'll have to make a trip. Do a live episode down here. Get Kevin down.
There you go.
That'd be great.
Well, hey, Kevin, this has been great, man. We really appreciate your time today and sharing with us.
Thanks, guys. I've had such a wonderful time. Thank you so much. God bless. Happy 2023.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank y'all for listening to the Cam and Otis Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Kevin Knebl, for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to pass along to someone else so they can enjoy it too. Make sure to follow the Cam and Otis Show on Facebook and Instagram, and you can watch full videos of the show on our YouTube page. While you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button too. And as always, the full archive of our episodes is available at www.camandotisshow.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you.